Now we're going to start thinking about sign language. Sign language is the natural language of many deaf individuals. It's important to understand that sign language is a full language and is not based on any spoken language. So, for example, Norwegian, Vietnamese, Rwandan Sign Language are all languages in their own right. Sign languages are not interchangeable, each having their own structure and vocabulary. In many low and middle income countries, sign language reflect the influence of evangelical or charitable groups who've worked in that country. So may, for example, reflect the influence of American, Finnish, German, Dutch or French sign language. Sign languages have no spoken component. They are visual languages used by the deaf community. In developmental terms, sign language follows a similar pattern of development as spoken language. Signed babble, copying single signs, using single signs, putting signs together, and so on. Sign language includes use of facial expression, body language, and a component of sign language is the use of finger spelling. This may be one-handed or two-handed. Finger spelling is used for names and may be used for new vocabulary. It's an important aspect of learning sign language, as are pointing and gesture. Sign language is a rich, powerful visual language that allows discussion, debate, and access to new ideas and experiences. The importance of having a drawn or video archive of a country's sign language is clear, as the majority of parents of deaf children will be hearing, having no experience or understanding of sign language. Parents will need to rely on those experienced in using sign language to learn signs and to understand how to use signs and visual approaches to communicate with their deaf son or daughter. Even where a visual record of local sign language exists, the cost to a family of this may be far too high. The deaf community provides a precious resource of native sign language that can be used to help parents and their young deaf children to learn to communicate. Whilst the input of a native sign language user is vitally important, it may be that such individuals are not empowered to provide such services. They will require support and development to help them teach families with young deaf children. They need to use an appropriate developmental approach rather than simply teaching lists of signs. This may be further complicated by the lack of interpreters and the cost of travel to more remote areas. There are, however, excellent examples of deaf role model programs in Kenya and Uganda that are explored later this week and underline the importance of parents and deaf children meeting deaf adults. It is, of course, very important that a baby sign curriculum is followed so that relevant signs and developmentally appropriate approaches are used. The National Deaf Children's Society in the UK developed a family sign language resource. While this is firmly rooted in British Sign Language and British culture, it has some underlying principles that apply to any young deaf child learning sign. Such principles include ensuring you have good eye contact, developing turn-taking skills, using natural gesture to support communication. Deaf children use 3 times more than hearing children. Using pointing to identify object, as this is an important link to sign. Following a child's interest in using daily routines to develop sign language skills. Getting down to a child's eye level when communicating. Using appropriate touch on the arm, shoulder or knee to get a child's attention, but never touching from behind as this can startle a child. Sign language is a natural way to communicate, just like speech. It involves an individual who sends the message and someone who receives the message. It requires sign language to be used in a meaningful, relaxed way that is accessible to the receiver, who can then model their response by repeating signs. It's unusual for parents not to share the language used by their child. Even where there are bilingual parents, at least one parent can provide a native language input. In the case of deaf children, with over 90% having hearing parents, any child learning sign language needs access to a native sign language user. They do not require this at school entry. Deaf children need access to this as early as possible, by 6 months, if they are to achieve native-like use of sign language. This is a major challenge in low and middle income countries where deafness is often very late identified at the age of 6 or 7 years. Where deaf children are taught sign language at a residential school, the challenge is then to ensure that parents and local communities can use sign language. If not, a child will be completely isolated at home. Where community and family members can use sign language, there is every chance a child can be a full member of that local community. This may be easier to achieve in urban areas. Very remote rural areas present a range of challenges. Children need to attend residential schools because of the distance between home and school. In many low and middle income countries, local understanding of deafness and approaches to individuals who are deaf may raise challenges. Parents will not usually have met a deaf adult and may have very negative understanding of what being deaf actually means. Parents can and do learn sign language skills when provided with the opportunity. By doing this, they give their children access to language and the chance to develop communication skills. Many people think that using sign language is detrimental to development of spoken language, but there's no evidence of this. There is a poor understanding of the potential of sign language to enrich the lives of deaf individuals. There is, for example, Gallaudet University in the United States that is specifically for the deaf. There is a Kenyan professor of psychology who is deaf. In New Zealand, there's a deaf member of parliament, and in the UK, individuals who have achieved PhDs. There's a deaf theatre, deaf poetry, there are signing choirs and deaf musicians.